Your reaction?
Well, I think it was a huge victory for Donald Trump yesterday for a number of reasons, not just because of the legal win, which is obviously really important that he stays on the ballot, but I think it's also going to really win enthusiasm with voters, because we're seeing more and more voters believe that this whole weaponization of different forms of government is being used against Donald Trump to suppress their voices. And I think that is something that people really do believe. Like 78% of Americans believe that it's a two-tier system of justice. A lot of people believe his claims that the system is rigged. And so this is one of those moments where the way the Democrats are going to respond here is going to dictate how people view it. And it already seems like they're trying to double down and say we're going to go after them and we're going to go after Trump in an even different way, which, again, I think is really going to hurt this narrative that they don't think they can win it fair and square. And I thought Donald Trump bringing up the weaponization of government, talking about, you know what, just win it fair and square if you believe that you can. And I think that's what the American people really want.
Yeah, you're right. And just like President Biden blowing off the Supreme Court over student loan debt, the Democrats are now working on legislation to force Trump off the ballot regardless, following the Supreme Court's ruling. Watch this.
President Biden, number one, stop weaponization. Fight your fight yourself. Don't use prosecutors and judges to go after your opponent, to try and damage your opponent so you can win an election. Our people can't stand it, and the people coming in really can't stand it because they're dying. Many are dying on the trip up, and they're dying in the country. And also, many of the people are criminals, and they're doing tremendous harm. I call it migrant crime. So I say respectfully to President Biden, you have the authorization right now. I did it. I didn't go to Congress and say, do I have the right to close? I fought Congress on it.
I am working with a number of my colleagues, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Eric Swalwell, to revive legislation that we had to set up a process by which we could determine that someone who committed insurrection is disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Well, here you go, Rebecca. They are continuing to force this through. Jamie Raskin working on legislation, he says, along with Eric Swalwell.
Maria, Jamie Raskin was a member of this January 6th Select Committee. He's a ranking member on the House Oversight Committee. So it bothers me greatly that they would go through all these committees and all these things and never formally say, hey, let's declare January 6th an insurrection. Let's say Trump did something wrong at Congress. But now that the Supreme Court has ruled this, now he's coming out and saying, hey, I passed legislation or tried to propose legislation in 2020 with Wasserman Schultz that basically was going to create a pathway. Just listen to this, Maria, a pathway for the Justice Department to sue to keep candidates off the ballot under the 14th Amendment. This is the weaponization of the Justice Department against people in this country running for office. That is not a constitutional republic. We have lost our country in this situation if this passes.
Cheryl, everybody sees through it. Don't they?
Yeah. Well, and what Raskin is doing is holding on to a wing and a prayer from one line from the judge's decision yesterday, which is that the Constitution makes Congress rather than the states responsible for enforcing Section 3 under federal office holders and candidates. Look, again, let the voters decide. The Supreme Court, that was a unanimous decision. And by the way, I would think that Raskin would know better than to partner up with Eric Swalwell. I mean, his moral compass, Maria, doesn't exactly point north, and I'll leave it there.
I can't not think of Fang Fang when I think of Eric Swalwell, honestly. All right, ladies, we're just getting started this morning. Slip in a short break, then also, you've got the big week of jobs data on deck, the February ADP and the January JOLTS report out tomorrow, and the February jobs report out on Friday. Rebecca.
I completely agree with Mark, Maria. I mean, this Fed is not interested in cutting in a good economic environment. And we keep saying over and over, the economy still seems good. The labor market still seems good. Inflation is ticking down. But it's not at, 2.4. It's not exactly at its 2. So there's a lot more risk for them to cut more prematurely. It's just so interesting because obviously at the FOMC meeting in December, the dot plot showed 3 cuts, Maria. The market said 6. Now, even with the 3 with the dot plot, we have Bostic saying maybe only 1 and then a pause so that they can see how the data actually impacts the economy. So this is a much more cautious and hawkish Fed than what we saw in December. And I think that is pushing the market back. And that's probably why yields are up and the market futures are down still.
Mark, you agree with that?
I do, and it's interesting. Consumer confidence is on the decline despite those strong data numbers. It's very ironic when you have such low unemployment, relatively strong wages, and awful consumer confidence. I think the American consumer is smart. They're seeing what's happening either at the border, they're seeing what's happening with deficits, they're seeing what's happening with crime, and I think combined, that's what is a big driver for the slowdown. When consumer confidence slows, that can be a headwind for the economy despite good data. So the Fed is looking at a couple of crosswinds here, and they need to reconcile them. And I think they'll reconcile it on the backs of being cautious and doing less, not more.
Well, maybe, but what do you make of investors going further out on the risk curve here? Look at Bitcoin. Yeah. I mean, it's pulling back this morning, but it briefly topped $68,000 yesterday. We're talking about all-time record high territory here. Bitcoin erasing a majority of its losses from the record high back in November 2021, Mark. Now we're looking at Bitcoin at 66,000. What's behind this? And would you put money to work in Bitcoin?
Well, greed eventually replaces fear, and that's true in every asset class, and I guess we have to call Bitcoin and crypto an asset class. It also goes back to Econ 101. It's supply and demand. If you can only build 21 million Bitcoins and you can create a frenzy or a belief system that this is a real asset class and you need to own it, then you can create FOMO. The ETFs that have been constructed are driving this. They're making it easy for people to say, oh, I want to put 2, 3, 4, 5% of my money in something like crypto, allegedly non-correlating. And there you have a frenzy to buy. And it is simply a price function of supply and demand. I'm not really sure there's economic value there other than the technology. I'm more in the Charlie Munger camp that it's, as he said, it's a turd, but I don't want to go that far. I'm just not sure that investors should look at this as a real asset class and a non-correlated area worth going into.
Mark, thank you so much. I want to get right to Cheryl Casoni. She's got the Target earnings hitting the tape right now. Cheryl.
Well, I tell you what, Mark, listen to this, because they came in with a very strong beat here. $2.98 on the earnings per share. The street was only looking for $2.42, $31.92 billion in revenue. That was a beat as well. Look, their profit popped about 60%, guys. This is pretty strong. And this really does look ahead to 2024 for Target. Looking through some of the top things that we're listening to here right now, that I'm watching as we go through. Comp sales did come down 4.4%, but that's better than expected. We were looking for a 4.6% drop there. Also, it is their forecast that seems to be a positive right now. Look at the stock go, Maria. It's up more than 5% right now. This is the forecast. Okay, and remember, in January, Target came out and they launched this deal-worthy plan, right? It's beauty products, it's clothing, it's food, it's everything. People are going there like they are to Walmart. They're going to Target for groceries, Maria. We know this, and I know that Mark mentioned the grocery segment wasn't as strong for Target as Walmart. But overall, look, this was a very strong quarter for Target. I know we got to run, but I always tell you this every time. I just went to Super Target last week. These stores are knocking it out of the park. You can get a $5 yoga top and $20 running shorts. I'll send it back to you.
You know what I think is interesting is the same-store sales, Cheryl. Yeah. The same-store sales were down, but they weren't down as much as the market was expecting.
Right, exactly.
So it's a positive.
Yeah, and look, by the way, the stock, can I point something out here? From their November report up to now, that stock has jumped 38%, and right now it's up 4.5%. It's up 5% now. So this is not a loser stock. In fact, the stock has really recovered. Oh, by the way, theft has gotten better. I know we got to go, but theft has gotten better at Target. They're throwing those headlines out right now.
All right, thanks, Cheryl. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Stock is up 6% on Target. So the protesters are demanding that she call Israel's conduct a genocide. They want her to use the word genocide. Lee, your reaction?
These protesters, it's just too much. I mean, to go after her of all people, who's, I think, largely on their side, is the irony of all of this. But it's going to be impossible to get people to go into public office if this is the way they're going to get treated, even by people who would arguably be on their side. And so I never thought I would say this, but I feel for AOC in this moment. She's just trying to go to the movies. let her. It's a different thing if she's at a public appearance, but come on.
Yeah, Cheryl.
Well, I got to say, this is one of the best things I think I woke up to this morning was watching AOC dropping the F-bomb. Now, this happened in Brooklyn, I will say, but her inner Bronx, I think, really came out in this clip. And I agree with Lee. And these protesters, by the way, they're still blocking traffic at the tunnels, at the Midtown, at the Holland. Get over yourselves. But, by pissing off New Yorkers, they're trying to go about their lives and then going after somebody who, by the way, has been on your side, to Lee's point. It just shows how stupid they are. I don't know what other word to use. They're just stupid.
But you know what? It's working because look at what's going on in this administration. Just had a whole conversation with Jack Keane about it. The general made the point that, look, why is the White House meeting with Bibi Netanyahu's political enemy? Gantz, okay? Why meet with Bibi Netanyahu's political enemy to put pressure on Netanyahu to do a ceasefire when we know damn well those Hamas hostages are not being released, Rebecca? So this comes from the top.
Yes, Maria, and I think that, people that are in public office, this is a very divisive issue, and these protesters are just beyond the pale. This is beyond the respect of human decency. And to Lee's point, this is not a Republican in a movie theater in Brooklyn. This is a Democrat who is primarily pro-Palestinian. So it doesn't make sense. And it's the double message, Maria, that this administration keeps sending out. They say that they're for Israel, but then they meet, like you said, with their enemies. And that causes all kinds of problems, and this is what we get.
Well, even the liberal justices on the Supreme Court are now saying you cannot mess with democracy. Democrats coming up, a unanimous. Lee Carter, I want to get your reaction here. And let me just share with you Newt Gingrich's tweet, his post on X. He says the biggest meaning of the Supreme Court decision on Colorado is that it was 9-0. And the justices concluded that the biggest threat to democracy was not Donald Trump, it was the left. Even the liberal justices agreed that the threat from the left is so great, even the liberal justices voted to protect the American people's right to have their candidates they choose, Lee.
I think it's so significant that this was a unanimous vote, and I can't underscore that enough, because if it were any other way, people would be able to say that this is, the Republican judges versus the Democratic judges. What this was is all judges basically said the same thing, and they said that this was not allowed, and we should move forward. And yet, what are Democrats doing? Democrats are saying, you know what, we lost this on a technicality. That's what some of them are saying. And others saying it doesn't change the fact that Trump engaged in insurrection, which, again, hasn't been proved or he hasn't been convicted of. Now, they're also taking this to Congress. Democrats can't let go. And so I think when Trump responded to talk about the weaponization of the government was smart. And also this idea that Democrats are really losing the ability to suppress the will of the people. And he's saying, you got to stop here. And that American people are feeling that. They don't want their voice to be diminished. They want to be able to be heard. And just as many Republicans are concerned about the future of democracy as Democrats. Democrats are trying to say that the future of democracy is their issue. It's not. When you look at polling now, Republicans are just as concerned that their voices are not going to be able to be heard, that they're going to be suppressed. And the Democratic response to this, I think, is proof of that for them.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
The liberal media is going nuts about this. Keith Olbermann, Lee, says that he's calling for the Supreme Court to be broken down, to be disavowed. CNN tries to hold it together after the 9-0 decision. Dana Bash says this: unfortunately, for America, the court is not necessarily wrong that this is the way the framers wanted it to be. Cheryl.
Yeah, well, let me add to that, because the Washington Post editorial board actually went the other direction. So it looks like finally they said keeping Mr. Trump on the ballot is the right call. The Washington Post editorial board, Jerry Baker in the Wall Street Journal writing, Democrats' hubris paves the way for a second Trump term. This is going to backfire on them. So Keith Olbermann, by the way, who listens to him anymore, they can scream and yell all they want and say that this is just the most horrific decision, because they believe that and they think that they know better than the American people and the American voter. Let people vote. And
Well,
the Supreme Court was very clear about that. Let the people's voices be heard.
The Biden administration reportedly admitting to secretly flying 320,000 illegal migrants into 43 U.S. airports last year. This is a blockbuster admission. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, this was part of President Biden's expansion of the CBP One app. CBP One app. It allows migrants to apply for travel authorization and temporary humanitarian release from these airports. Customs and Border Patrol sources told Fox News that Border Patrol apprehended more than 141,000 illegal migrants in February. And of that number, over 70% were in blue states: Arizona, California, New Mexico. Texas, which has 5 out of the 9 Border Patrol sectors along the border, saw just over 42,000 apprehensions in February. I mean, this is pretty stunning that the administration is admitting that they actually took these migrants and flew them into cities and states across the country, Rebecca. Remember when the New York Post had cameras in Westchester and they caught all these migrants getting off the plane and the White House would not say a thing about it? They wouldn't admit it. And now we know. They're admitting, yes, they have enabled these migrants to go to cities across the country, Rebecca.
You know, Maria, I know the days of Watergate are over and we don't have these major political bombshells. But when you have an administration that has taken the stance that they will come out every single day and beat the American public over the head, that if Congress doesn't do something, nothing's going to get fixed, that it's up to Congress, the president is powerless. And then you find out that not only did he cancel all of the executive orders remaining in Mexico, that Trump successfully, dealt with the border crisis on, but they enable this app to have illegal immigrants across the world, Maria, request asylum. Then NGOs and humanitarian groups get involved, schedule their travel, get them here. And then here's the worst part. The administration won't even tell us the airports because they can do this program under cover of night and not let us know. But if we, the American public, demand to know these 43 airports, no, that's an operational problem that could create vulnerabilities. We can't publicize what we're doing because then people could attack it. This has got to stop. We didn't vote for this. We don't accept this. This is not the rule of law.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're just getting started this hour. Quick break, and then markets are on the move this morning ahead of the Federal Reserve's 2-day testimony on Capitol Hill. Jay Powell will address the House tomorrow and the Senate on Thursday. What that could mean for a potential rate cut coming. It is time for the Word on Wall Street. Top investors. Welcome back. It is time for the Word on Wall Street. Top investors watching your money. Joining me right now is Horizon Investments Chief Investment Officer Scott Ladner. Also with me is Rebecca Walser. Great to see you, Scott. Thank you so much for joining the conversation this morning.
Hey, Maria. Thanks for having me.
And Rebecca and I were talking earlier about the Federal Reserve. I want to look at futures this morning, Rebecca. Market is lower. We got the Dow Industrials down 55, the Nasdaq down 82, and yet the S&P and the Nasdaq are retreating from record performance. They both hit record highs yesterday. They pulled back because of declines in the Magnificent Seven stocks, those big tech stocks coming down to earth a little. Nvidia, the only technology stock closing higher yesterday, it was up again 3 2/3% at the close yesterday. However, it is pulling back fractionally this morning. Nonetheless, here it is. Look, it's extending the rally, actually. It's up another 0.5% right now. Target is certainly a story stock this morning. It is up big. It reported a double beat on fourth quarter results, earnings and revenue better than expected. Take a look at this stock. It's up 7% right now. It did report a decline in comparable store sales, but that was better than the decline that the market was looking for. Digital comp sales were actually better than estimated. The comp sales were down, but not down as much as the market expected. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on the consumer and what the Target report told us?
Well, Maria, it's interesting because we have same sales stores down. We have com down over 4%. But like you said, that was already expected. It was already pronounced in their, actual earnings expectations. So the market is not going to ding them for that. It's going to reward them because they still have a double beat. And I do think that it does speak to, even though as we see consumer sentiment drop, even enter month, the worst drop we've seen since March of 2020 on the University of Michigan's, consumer sentiment in February, we still do see the consumer spending. And I do expect, we obviously know the dollar stores and Walmart goes up when the market's struggling. But to see Target, which is a little more price insensitive or sensitive, people are going there with expecting a little bit higher prices than Walmart and the dollar stores. And the fact that it is holding up this well is a good sign, I think, overall for the economy and for retail. Maria.
Scott, what do you say about this macro story with rates where they are? The 10-year this morning is down, but it's still sitting at around 4.2%. What are we at? 4.1% and change. The Fed Chairman Jay Powell is going to be testifying this week in his annual Humphrey Hawkins testimony. The House Financial Services Committee will hear his testimony tomorrow, and the Senate Banking Committee on Thursday. Lawmakers will likely question the head of the Fed on the central bank's handling of inflation, the plans to raise bank capital requirements, and the plans to cut interest rates. As Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic said that he expects the central bank to pause interest rate moves after just one cut in the third quarter. So is that what you think? Because we've got a big week of jobs data, which is also likely to inform. Got the February ADP and January JOLTS report out tomorrow, followed by the February jobs report out on Friday. Scott, what are you expecting?
Yeah, really, as you just highlighted, it's a busy week. There is a lot going on here. Pardon me. And Powell's testimony is going to be central to a lot of it. So we do think he's going to come out. He's going to have to weave a narrative that the Fed is still very data dependent. They like the progress they've seen on inflation thus far, but they don't think that they're quite there yet. And so that's why they paused it, or not, frankly, haven't started cutting yet, as we thought they would have by now. But we do think they're going to need to start around the summertime, because as you get closer to the election, we can all play in this fancy world where the Fed is not a political instrument. There is some politicization about the Fed in reality, and so they're not going to want to cut in September or October, like right before the election. They can't have that be the first cut. Right. So that's why I think Bostic came out and said, "Hey, listen, we'll cut. We'll probably cut in the summer, and then we're just going to pause. We're going to just hang out through the election, so we don't get accused of any sort of political influence or anything like that." That's probably the playbook for right now, unless we get some continued high inflation prints, which we frankly don't expect right now.
Yeah, but let me tell you, I mean, Scott, if we don't have a string of cuts the way the market is expecting, will we see a market sell-off? Do you want to buy stocks here ahead of that, or you want to hold your powder dry?
I think you need to be participating, but you probably don't want to be adding hand over fist right here. The market has come down from pricing in like a little over 6 cuts in 2024 to now just basically being what the Fed is, which is pricing around 3 cuts this year. And the market's done exceptionally well this year so far in the face of that repricing. So I think that if we were to get a move where the market priced out all Fed cuts for 2024, yeah, that's going to be a problem. We don't want to see that. But similarly, we don't want to see a situation where the market goes in and prices like 8 cuts, because that means the market's pricing in something like a recessionary outcome, which we also obviously don't see.
Well, that's right. And that would be fantasy, 8 cuts. I mean, you have to have a deteriorating situation to have 8 cuts. My goodness. Scott, it's great to see you. Thank you, sir. Scott Ladner joining us.
Maria,
Rebecca, you're with us all morning, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great word on Wall Street. Lee, we're seeing resources get stretched across the country.
We sure are. And it's unbelievable to me, the change in sentiment that we're seeing towards illegal immigration. Now, it used to be very much just a Republican issue. They were the ones that were talking about it. It's now the #1 issue among Americans, and that includes Democrats. There was even an article this morning in the New York Times. It says, I hope the Democratic Party and I hope that Joe Biden goes to the right on immigration, and talks about going to the left on Gaza, which is a separate story. But talking about wanting the Democratic Party to go to the right on immigration. They know this is a losing issue for them. Republicans, in every single poll that you can take a look at, they're the ones that people think are going to be able to solve this, and it is becoming an increasing issue to the American people.
It sure is. Cheryl.
Well, I also want to highlight the language issues that many teachers are having to deal with now, because these kids that are coming into these schools, they don't speak English, and many of them, in fact, most of them, are unvaccinated. So there are so many issues. I'm talking about measles, mumps. I mean, just your basic childhood vaccines. I'm not talking about COVID, folks. And this is why these teachers in these classrooms are struggling, and who ends up suffering is the kids of the taxpayers in these states. And by the way, we're talking about blue cities, but it's also happening in Arizona and in California, which she did mention as well. And it's really disrupting the education of these children. And look, these parents are fed up. And I always say this: you get what you vote for. And we've got an election coming up in November, something to remember.
Yeah. Rebecca?
Maria, besides the bombshell that this administration opened up the CBP One app to allow people that are in other countries to apply for asylum while they're in their other country, and then have this humanitarian aid arranged, and 320,000 just in 2023 were flown into our country. Besides that bombshell, which I still can't get over this morning, what the American public understands is it is now taking their resources. They are now seeing their schools closed, or their their centers closed, their homeless centers, their shelters closed because now the resources are going to these illegal migrants. And that is when it has to stop. And guess what? The states don't have the resources. So the states are going to rely on this federal government for the tax revenue for these resources. And guess who pays the federal government? Our tax base. So we can't afford this. Period. End of story.
All right. Lee Carter, your reaction, and I want to underline what Matt Whitaker said. It really is stunning that it was 9-0. Well, not really stunning. Everybody expected it to be as close to unanimous as possible. But what does that tell you? That tells you that even the liberal judges saw this effort as an effort to obstruct democracy.
That's right. And I think that especially it was so important that it was unanimous, because otherwise people would have fought it, said that it was it was just the Republican justices that were pro-Trump. There's an extreme mistrust right now of the Supreme Court. It's the lowest it's ever been. Only 41% of Americans trust the Supreme Court. So the fact that this was unanimous, I think, goes a long way to making sure that people believe now what the ruling is. But I think it's really interesting to see how people are reacting. When you look at Republicans and independents, they're reacting, focusing at the fact this was a unanimous vote. They're saying that the will of the people will not be suppressed. They're very, very enthusiastic. When you hear from Democrats, they're really focused on what's not in there. They're focused on the fact that this was on a technicality. They're focused on the fact that now it's up to Congress. So they're already trying to draft a bill. I think this is going to backfire, though, on the Democrats, because as much as Democrats are talking about the democracy's at threat right now, Republicans are saying the same thing. And this kind of behavior from the Democrats just goes to say it's not the Republicans who are a threat to democracy. It's across the board right now. We've got a real big problem. Weaponization of government, and look at what they're doing here.
Yeah, and despite the unanimous ruling, Democrats are still pushing to take Trump off the ballot. Some are now shoring up new legislation to do just that. Watch Jamie Raskin. Watch.
I am working with a number of my colleagues, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Eric Swalwell, to revive legislation that we had to set up a process by which we could determine that someone who committed insurrection is disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Cheryl, your reaction.
Well, earlier I mentioned that the editorial board at the Washington Post actually said keeping Mr. Trump on the ballot is the right call. But they bring up also, and they criticize Jamie Raskin. They also say the notion an arcane Civil War era provision could be used to exclude Trump from presidential politics. It's too good to be true. Even the Washington Post is pointing this out, Maria. So Jamie Raskin can, they can yell and they can scream and they can say, we know better than you, but even Jerry Baker pointed out in his editorial in the Wall Street Journal this morning that you've got these elites that are sitting there in their New York and their Los Angeles ivory towers, thumbing their nose down at voters, and they don't understand why there is so much support for President Trump. And this is why they might be handing him a victory in November, because they cannot seem to understand why the man still has support, and he is polling ahead of the current president, and that is Joe Biden. The White House is finally waking up to that fact, Maria, but the media has not, it seems, at least on the liberal side.
Rebecca.
Yeah, Maria, I can't say. From a legal perspective, I think it was pretty clear cut that they basically all of them read that Congress is the one that is the appropriate body to actually make a decision on someone qualifies under that section of the 14th Amendment. But the truth is, I told you this before, there's something called the political question doctrine. And any time a case really could be decided at the ballot box by the voter instead of a court or adjudication through judicial system, the court is going to favor that. So this is absolutely a win for the rule of law. Matt Whitaker was exactly right.
All right, we are just getting started this hour. We've got a lot coming up on this Super Tuesday. The economy remains top of mind for voters across the 16 states and one territory open today for Super Tuesday votes. Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen is here. To the important issues that matter to them. Lee, no surprise, a lot of people brought up border. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and we've seen the polling that's the number one issue right now, immigration. And we're also seeing, of course, you heard a lot about the economy and inflation there. There's also a lot of concern about the role of government right now. And there's just, as you can see, a lot of people are concerned about that. But one of the things that I think is interesting is there's been some polling lately to see who people think is going to handle things better. Joe Biden, the only thing that people think that he's going to handle better is the environment and education. Trump, and this includes Democrats, by the way, Trump, he's winning on the economy, immigration, foreign policy, crime, taxes, inflation, China, Israel. Across the board, the issues that you hear are most important to voters are really breaking towards Donald Trump, and I think that's why we're seeing such a surge in his polling.
Rebecca.
I love Bartiromo Boulevard, Maria, and I think that it definitely shows that sanctuary cities, sanctuary states that used to just profess that they were sanctuaries, now with the red states pushing these people up and people feeling it and seeing that their schools and their resources are being taken away from them, the citizens, in order to help what these illegal migrants are coming in. I think that's why this has jumped this crisis up to the number one issue. The economy also right behind it, and I agree that this is a very important election.
Yeah, Cheryl.
I agree with Rebecca. I love the name Bartiromo Boulevard. It's just got a great ring to it. But what I found interesting about this story is that, and this is put together in New York City, and they're all talking about immigration and the southern border and violence. I mean, that is what life is like in New York City. And this isn't just about the presidential election. There's a lot of down ballot races that are primary ballots today, actually, for Super Tuesday. And then in June, we're going to have more primaries here in New York. You know, people always laugh when I say, I don't know if New York State could go red. I could see New York State going for Donald Trump. And watching the answers from my fellow New Yorkers just now, Maria, I don't think I'm wrong in making that assumption. People are fed up with what has happened. They're not just going to blame President Biden. They're going to blame their local officials and maybe even their governor.
New York feels like a different place. You're right about that. I agree with that. All right, we'll take a break and come right back. You're watching Mornings with Maria live on Fox. Lee Carter, your final thoughts here.
Well, Trump's saying that he's going to expect to end the day with more than 1,000 delegates, but that's going to be a good day for him. I think this is all but over, and I'm not sure what Nikki Haley is thinking. I'm not sure what she thinks her path is, but I think we've got a rematch of 2020. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to be at it in November.
Yeah, it certainly, we're looking at some specific states this morning as well. Rebecca, California is one of those having its primary today. And you've got Adam Schiff competing against Steve Garvey, a major leaguer in California. They want to go up, well, Garvey wants to go up against Schiff in November, that's for sure.
Yeah, that would be a great matchup. I'd love to see that, Maria. But, you know, I think Nikki is thinking that she might stay in case Trump is somehow, through legal challenges, you know, taken out. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense why she'd stay in. So this is a great day. I hope that there's some more clarity around the Republican nominee after today.
Cheryl.
Well, I'm going to be watching some of the down ballot races down in Texas. You know, Governor Abbott and also Ken Paxton are pretty angry at the Texas State House right now. There's been a lot of kind of more local issues that have been fought over there. You know, Paxton's put a lot of money, millions actually, behind several challengers in this primary today in that state to go against incumbents. So making his voice and his opinion heard for sure in the great state of Texas, and also who's going to challenge Ted Cruz. I think it's going to be interesting to see where all this goes.
Yeah, we will see. We got a lot coming up this week. We got the jobs numbers coming up. And, of course, Jay Powell is going to be speaking, testifying in front of the House Financial Services Committee tomorrow and then the Senate Banking Committee on Wednesday. Rebecca, your thoughts on what we could hear from the chairman of the Fed tomorrow?
Well, Maria, it's very clear to me that they're a lot more hawkish, that they want to be cautious and they don't want to cut too early because that could create reverberations of the other kind. So, but for sure, inflation's coming down. This economy seems to be going in a different direction. So we have mixed data, and I cannot wait to hear what he says to Congress and really what he talks about, Maria, with the capitalization requirements for banking, because that's going to really impact the banking sector.
And Cheryl, we're watching the consumer. Good numbers from Target today.
Target was actually what a story this morning, right? That was fascinating to watch. And again, you know, we've got the jobs numbers coming out, to her point, on Friday. All I can say, can't wait for the revisions, Maria. I mean, a month ago I told you, I said, forget January. Let's just talk about the February number, because this is ridiculous how they're calculating the data.
Look at this stock. Target is up 9 1/3% right now on this better than expected report. which we brought you earlier. The stock has been gaining momentum throughout the time we've been on air. The opening bell now 30 minutes away. Thank you so much, ladies. Great show today. Lee Carter, Rebecca Walser, Cheryl Casoni, we so appreciate your time. We will see you tomorrow. We've got a big show tomorrow as we anticipate the chairman of the Fed speaking on Capitol Hill tomorrow.